Hi, everyone. My name is Tomashi. Welcome back to the Brown 2 Book Club, where we get together to read and discuss Brown 2, originally published in 2021 by the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study and reprinted in 2022 by the Boston Ujima Project as part of the Ashe Cultural Assembly Grant. We read together from 1,000-word transcriptions of 2020 interviews with discussing contributors Matt Kreger, Tomiko Brown-Nagin, David J. Harris, Donna Bivens, Nia K. Evans, Rashida Richardson, Meredith Whitaker, and Sabelo Sethu Mlambi. During the COVID-19 public health crisis lockdown of 2020, I got to work with an extraordinary team of research assistants at the Radcliffe Institute to use Zoom to ask questions about education advocacy histories before and after Brown v. Board of Education 2, the unanimous Supreme Court decision of 1955. This case had to do with implementing desegregation of public schools with all deliberate speed. We worked together in physical isolation, transcribing the conversations to make a book. Ours was the only project to continue at the Institute during this unprecedented time. We asked, how do we make an exhibition available to the public when we cannot all get together in the same space? The publication was our way. When the book was published, members of the general public and the Harvard community at large were invited to request copies that were each sent by mail from the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. When Harvard campus reopened, visitors of the Brown 2 exhibition in the Kulakundis Family Gallery received copies of the book in person. Nearly 1,000 books were given out in 2021. Now the Boston Ujima Project's Ashe Cultural Assembly Grant has funded a second printing of Brown 2 for Ujima members in the greater Boston area to reunite and return to the text by logging in together from all over the world. If you don't yet have a hard copy and want to read along with us tonight, I've dropped the link to the PDF in the chat. It's also available at on the study page on the Boston Ujima Project website. Let's get started with some simple introductions in the room, just really quickly, because our time is so short. Just tell us what is your name? What pronouns do you prefer if you'd like to specify? No pressure if you don't. And where in the world are you logging in from? Let's start with Nia.
All right, I am Nia. I use she, her pronouns, and I am logging in from the Massachusetts land, AKA Cambridge, Massachusetts. Is that all I'm supposed to say?
Yeah, that's okay. It. You want to pass it to someone?
Yeah, I'll pass it to Catherine.
Hi, I'm Catherine. Hi, Nia. I use the pronouns she and her, and I am logging in from Singapore. Did that work? Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's great. You want to pass it to someone?
Yeah, I'll pass it to David.
Hi, I'm David. I'm logging in from West Medford, Massachusetts.
And how
I'll
about
pass it to Jason?
Okay, yeah.
How's everybody doing tonight? I'm Jason Boyd, and I'm logging in from Dorchester, USA in Massachusetts. And I will pass it to Martha.
Hi, my name is Martha. I use she or they pronouns, and I am logging in from Somerville, Massachusetts. I will pass to Claudia and whoever is with you.
Hi, I'm Claudia. My pronouns are she, hers. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. And we're logging in from Massachusetts and Jamaica Plain. And this is
Hi, I'm Gabby.
Gabby. And we'll pass it to Louise.
Okay, yeah. I'm Louise, and I'm logging in from South Boston, Massachusetts. Let's see who hasn't. Has Camilla gone?
I haven't, Louise. Hi, all. I'm Camila. I use they and she, and I'm logging in from Roslindale, Massachusetts. And I'll pass it to Sabelo. Did I say your name right?
Yeah, well, it works. Hi, Sabelo. He, him. logging in from Cambridge, from the ancestral plane of Wakanda. And I will pass it to Blue.
Hey y'all, my name is Blue, pronounced she, they, and I'm calling from Boston, Massachusetts. And I'll pass it on to Perla.
Hi, I'm Perla. I use the pronouns they, she, and I'm logging in from East Boston.
All right, what about Lise? Lisa? Lise? Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing it, please correct me.
Yeah, so it's Lise, like please.
Lise.
Yep. I'm logging in from Randolph, Massachusetts Ancestral Indigenous Lands, and I'm here with
Mars.
my bad, our camera's not on, but we're here.
Yes. Awesome. Georgette Greer-Key, we're calling you.
Hey everybody, how you doing? I'm logging in from Strong Island, New York on the East End. So happy to be here.
Fantastic. Who else hasn't gone? Natasha, have we heard from you?
No, hi everybody. My name is Natasha. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm logging in from Worcester, Massachusetts.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I'm just going to jump in and just go to more people so y'all don't have to worry about that, so we can start reading. Jessica Tan, have we heard from you yet? Okay, maybe, oh, they're there.
Sorry, it's technical difficulties. Hi, my name's Jess. I'm in Rhode Island tonight. I think where I am is like Wampanoag or Narragansett. I always get confused, but hi, nice to meet you all and grateful to be here.
Awesome. Who else hasn't gone? Who haven't we heard from? Stella? Did we hear from Stella?
Hello,
Stella!
I'm Stella. Hi. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm logging in from Roxbury Crossing today.
Like literally from Roxbury Crossing. Okay. Thank you so much for logging in to let us read to you on your way, on your journey. And then Mona Lane just logged in. Mona, we're just doing quick intros. What's your name? What pronouns do you prefer if you'd like to specify, and where in the world are you logging in from? And then we're gonna get started reading.
Okay, sure, yeah, sorry for being so late. Mona Lane is me. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm logging in from Brooklyn in New York City.
Awesome. And oh, I don't think that, oh, did Sierra go? Sierra?
Sierra did not go. Thank you so much. Sierra Peters, she, they pronouns. Calling in from the People's Republic of Brooklyn, Lenape territory, but you know it's 617 all day, gang gang.
Oh my gosh. Wow, okay. Hardcore, I respect it. And I'm Tomashi, and I am normally in Cambridge or in East Somerville, Massachusetts, and today I'm logging in from the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Okay, y'all, let's get started. Let me get back to my script to guide me. Okay, so thank you everyone. Let's get started. Let's start reading. We will start with Rashida Richardson's chapter and then follow up with David J. Harris's chapter. Let's begin by turning to page 69. Although in this book, the conversations are in a specific order, they actually occurred in an order that is different than they're laid out in the table of contents. So in actual life, we interviewed Rashida first. What page on the PDF? It should be page 69. Oh, and I will share screen. I have 2 copies. I'll share screen also.
Just want to point out real quick, because Sierra just wrote stack. So it doesn't mean this is stack to read, Sierra? Yeah, so I think this is, if you want, it's page 35 in the PDF also, by the way. It is different numbering in the PDF. But yeah, you can use to chat to call stack for reading order. So we got Sierra going first.
Awesome, Sierra. So we're starting with Rashida Richardson on the intersection of tech, policy, and civil rights. Take it away, Sierra.
Thank you. And we are still reading 2 paragraphs and passing it, correct?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
But we'll start with Rashida's intro. Maybe I should do that. I'll do Rashida's intro and you take over the reading. Okay, so Rashida Richardson at the time was the director of policy research at AI Now Institute, Artificial Intelligence Now Institute, an interdisciplinary research institute based at NYU and focused on the social implications of artificial intelligence. Prior to her work with AI Now, she was legislative counsel at the New York Civil Liberties Union, the NYCLU, where she led the organization's work on privacy, technology, surveillance, and education issues. Rashida describes her work as being at the intersection of tech policy and civil rights. She explains how the uncritical use of data and technology can further entrench systemic inequalities and highlights the specific ways we can see this occur in the realm of education. The following text has been edited and condensed from an interview with Rashida. All right, Sierra.
Thank you. So she goes, my background is as a lawyer who worked primarily on civil rights issues, including school desegregation, specifically in New York State. I also previously worked on issues such as data privacy, student data privacy, and the intersection of education, tech privacy, and surveillance. At AI Now, I serve a dual role in that I do civil rights focused research, looking primarily at the government use of different types of data-driven technologies, trying to understand their current and perspective implication, and then designing and developing policy and interventions to address the problems we're seeing in our respective research. I can keep going.
I'm trying to. Oh. All right. I'm trying to use my background, having worked so many different civil rights issues and my form of structural analysis, to think about what we're seeing in the technology development pipeline, to see how it connects to the structural problems and harm that have existed in society, in order to fully understand the right entry points for intervention. Generally, a lot of the conversation in AI and tech policy is focused on privacy, or it looks at the problems facilitated by or derived from technologies as exclusively a tech problem, rather than seeing them as a socio-technical and an extrapolation of the structural problems that already exist. Why I came to AI Now and why I care about these issues, especially given my background, is that I don't think these technologies are presenting new problems. I think they are replicating a lot of historical and current problems, or even amplifying them in ways. So this work in AI/big data tech can provide an opportunity to force conversations around equity or force conversations around segregation in ways that there was no political or economic appetite for before. That's why I see looking at tech and specifically AI issues as an opportunity to intervene. I think one problem in education is that specifically because of research disparities in schools, tech becomes this band-aid to avoid the harder policy and social changes that need to happen.
Would anyone like to take over?
I can if no one, oh, sorry.
I was gonna say Claudia has stat, she put stat in the chat.
Awesome, thanks, I can't see that, thank you.
Education is a space where I feel that often technology is adopted and implications and consequences are an afterthought. It doesn't start with a larger question of what do we think a fair and equitable education system looks like? One that has pluralistic learning, if all the things that tons of research show are necessary. Then the second question should be, what is the role of technology in addressing and advancing that vision in addition to policy and other social changes? But that's not the way that tech works in education, generally, or in educational policy. It's usually put out into the world and said that it will solve the problem without even confirming that whatever problem has been identified is in fact the problem. So I do think that in education, using tech as a way to force fundamental changes is a little bit more challenging because of the way technology functions and how it's being seen as a solution. A lot of my research and policy work locally has focused on government use of what we call automated decision systems. That's really any type of big data technology that relies on government and private data or any type of main data source to either facilitate or advance government decisions making or policy implementation. I actually first started working on it in regard to school segregation when I was at the ACLU. There was this looming question about New York high school admissions and the extreme racial disparities in the specialized high schools. But there were also questions about the algorithm that was used to place students in schools and whether it was contributing to both racial and social economic disparities that are very prevalent in New York City schools. Then on the flip side, there was a guy, Michael Alvis, who has pushed what's called the adjust for school district's interests. So if a school district wants to have more racial equity across its schools or social economic equity, then it can adjust the rankings and assignment of students to try to advance that goal. And there was also a question in my research of talking to different practitioners and researchers about whether the controlled choice model would work.
Mona Hustak.
Yeah.
Sorry, one sec, let me get my bearings here. The last issue I worked on at the ACLU before coming to the AI now was around the first school district in the country, to use facial recognition in Lockport, New York. New York State has a bond act that provides funding technologies in schools. Most other school districts use this state funding for instructional or educational technologies, or to upgrade really aged systems or software that the school needed. But Lockport turned to one small provision that allowed the funding to be used for security reasons. I don't think the legislature anticipated that the funding would be used for facial recognition, more like CCTV cameras, metal detectors, and stuff that's already in schools. It was also kind of astonishing that no one in the state government was actually tracking how much that money was used, and that, hold on a second. And that no one in the state government was actually tracking, and that it took a reaction and advocacy to draw attention to the fact that school districts could exploit the funding in this way. Lockport wasn't even aware of all the news media pointing out the racial and gender disparities with facial recognition. And it's a district that already had issues with racial disparity in school discipline practices. Black students and mixed race students were likely to experience more extreme and more frequent discipline. There seemed to be a complete lack of understanding in how that pre-existing issue could be worsened by the application of racial bias technology. That is more likely to misidentify students of color. But I see another equity issue arising in schools that are less diverse, in that students of color, students with disabilities, any type of marginalized student are more likely to have a negative experience with the technology because it's not built for them or with them in mind, and can experience negative educational outcomes or just have a more negative education experience as a result of the colorblind policy implementation of these technologies. I can pass it off to another.
But that doesn't mean I don't have hope that there are ways to use the conversation around how technology exists in schools, or even how it has become so prevalent in schools to force conversations around the more uncomfortable issues of the long-term consequences of resource hoarding or other things that people see as personal choices, but that are inherently political. If we know we're too far along and there's no way to reverse our dependence and reliance, reliance on big data in society, then how can we use this data or even more advanced applications of technology like machine learning that can look for patterns to legitimize problems we all know exist and therefore help advocacy that is striving for educational equity? So many institutional actors are asking for evidence-based policy or metrics to support disparate impact claims. If that is the logical approach to seeing problems that they have, then how can we use this data or data-driven technologies to help legitimize advocacy that needs to happen, or at least legitimize the harms and complaints that exist? In our current moment with remote schooling, I think the most obvious issues of resource inequality, economic inequality, and the digital divide have been exacerbated. I know that attendance and and participation in remote classes is completely down. A lot of students' main form of internet is through a phone. So what does it mean when that phone is a whole family's main source of internet?
And Sabelo has that.
Okay. My fear is that there will continue to be colorblind, class-bound blind, power-blind policies put into place that don't appreciate the varied experiences of students. And by failing to acknowledge that difference, will be more likely to leave those who really were underserved and did experience harm in this period in a worse place than others. I just hope that the extreme policy decisions, business decisions, and other social decisions that are being made to address this crisis serve as some sort of evidence to force conversations around fundamental changes in society. Okay, scrolling down.
That's it.
Oh, that's it?
Yeah.
Okay.
1,000 words. We somehow got
Cool.
your conversations into 1,000 words. Thank you so much, everyone. So let's pause just for a few minutes. We started late and I apologize for that. And we want to transition into David J. Harris's 1,000-word chapter. But let's pause for a moment for any thoughts or responses from the group. Are there any areas of this conversation that you've underlined, anything that stands out to you as noteworthy of, I see Sierra's hand. Go ahead, Sierra.
I think the most noteworthy thing that I took note of is algorithms being used for school choice. When I was in primary school and things like that, I did not realize, I always thought that it was based on the radius. And so when you got to high school and you actually got to rank your choice and things like that, and it wasn't based on your neighborhood, it was always it was really interesting to me because I remember really wanting to go to like Snowden International School or something. I ended up going to a charter school. But Snowden International is a Boston public school. You get to learn different languages, blah, blah, blah. So it seemed really interesting. Like you get to learn Japanese, you get to take all these cool classes. And so learning that, people are using algorithms to sort children into schools is like really jarring to me because what is that based on? I don't think that I've ever heard that, nor has that ever really been discussed in the public domain. So that just really struck me.
Thanks, Sierra. Really great to be followed up by Sabelo and then Louise. Sabelo?
Right. So I don't know if I read it correctly, but it seems like that Rashida was saying that we can also use AI or algorithms to show that there's bias within those systems. So I thought that was interesting how the same tool used for harm, we can almost kind of like repurpose it or use it to demonstrate that, hey, this system does perpetuate harms.
Thank you so much, Sabelo. Louise and then Claudia and the team in there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is, I'm not thinking just the education and tech, like the prison incarnation, putting people in jail. Like they found out that what they used for the logarithms, some things they used made Black people more apt to go to jail. But it's like if you came from a bad family, if you came from a poor family, we're like more likely to commit a crime again. It's just because where they were from, not the person they did it. And like when I took hard science, like chemistry, they weren't so sure of themselves with algorithms. They said that a theory is something because it works and we can make predictions on it. But there might be something spurious that's happening alongside of it that's causing the effect. And they're not looking at that. They're assuming they're all right. And when I took sociological methods, I had a professor from Iran that brought up, and he said they did it. They said when you read studies, look what goes into it. Look what they accounted. Like it's the same thing with algorithms. he said they came out that, like I started out in chemistry, so I knew the thing. He said they came out that natural science majors were more for free sex. And he asked what could the difference, and I raised up my hand and said gender. And they found out like natural science majors were more male. So, you know, so the algorithm they're too little set that it's what people put into them.
Thank you, Louise. Absolutely. Claudia? And then we'll get back, and then we'll start reading David's chapter.
Awesome. I think Sierra has a note, Tomashi, about the screenshot on page 80. If you, like in the chat, she said, could you talk about the note that you screenshot on page 80 at some point? It's such an interesting choice alongside the photos of Murray and Babson.
Okay, Martha, can you jump in on this?
Yeah, is this, so I'm not sure if this is the right one because you said page 80, but I think that's what you're talking about, right? The Gloria Steinem and Ruth Batson. Yeah, okay. Yeah, this was super interesting. So when we were in the archive, we started to notice it's really hard to see and some of them are cut off. But there was a difference in tagging. So I don't think we get to fully, yeah, we see Gloria Steinem tagged with really different tags, whereas Ruth Batson so Gloria Steinem is tagged with women, portraits, meetings, politician, and feminism, and with Ruth as subject. And then for Ruth Batson, we have this really wacky list, there it is, yeah, of all kinds of things, including objects, classrooms, offices, drums, beaches, pipes, African Americans. So we were calling that into the sort of conversational and interview space with Rashida and asking her to just sort of like make any type of commentary on that. And then ended up, I think, instead of including what she said about it, we put that in as a compliment to sort of like how this actually is taking place in the archives of the Radcliffe tech-wise. Yeah.
Yeah, so to facilitate these conversations, am I muted? No. To facilitate these conversations, we produced interview preparatory documents where the whole team worked together to author questions, and our questions often had to do with what we experienced in the archive in this case, or were also informed by whatever previous conversation we had with a previous discussant. So just to be like absolutely clear, the subject tags under this image of Ruth Batson working in her office, include Boston, Massachusetts, United States, women, clothing and dress, portraits, hairstyles, jewelry, hats, eyeglasses, men's clothing, exterior views, children and adults, children, mustache, students, classrooms, offices, drums, beaches, pipes, African Americans, photographs. And under Gloria Steinem, working in an office, I guess, is woman, portraits, meetings, politicians, feminism. So because we had such a tight word limit, we couldn't actually get into, we weren't able to include the very robust conversation that arose with Rashida about perversions of archival tagging and how they're really left up to individuals, whoever's doing it and whoever accepts it. But like Martha said, we did want to include a reference to that exchange. I see Claudia's hand back up and Louise's hand back up. Is there any way that y'all could hold that so we can start reading?
Well, can we just do Claudia? Because Claudia was going to go, but then just point out the question in the chat.
I wonder what page we on.
We're on page 75, Louise.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead, Claudia.
Hi, I just kind of wanted to like also echo that sentiment. I feel like just having that there with the question actually just really promotes discovery and for people to go out and explore and be like, okay, wait, what is going on here? Sometimes I feel like if you hear too much dialogue around it, you feel like you understand it rather than going out and experiencing it. So props on that. And just like in terms of the algorithms, it's like, yeah, say algorithms, but what is that? Like, this is a perfect example because what data sets are those algorithms generated? Are they from grades? Are they from, any other just sort of, numerical or quantitative data that really doesn't reflect a student's interests, et cetera? Like, where are these coming from? And you see this all of the time in so many different formats of data, and that band-aid of technology without really understanding what's behind it and sort of what are the psychological implications of the experience of going into an archive and experiencing this while you're doing it, and that in library systems and just sort of all over the place, in addition to the bias that was exacerbated and shown here. It's just really beautiful to see that call out there too.
We thank you for that observation. We put a lot of thought into that. Thanks. All right, y'all. Let's keep on moving to, let's move to page, I'm sorry. Did we start at page? Let's move to page 69. No. Am I right? No, I'm wrong.
69 is Rashida's.
Right. Let's move to page 39. Thanks.
And Sabelo only had one paragraph, so maybe he can start us off with the first paragraph.
It's a great idea.
And what's the page on the PDF?
I'm gonna pull it up right now.
Oh, okay, you have a PDF. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, there's Mr. Harris. An extraordinary influence, I would say, really the catalyst for this entire project was our initial conversation with Professor Harris on the day that Cambridge went into lockdown. In the PDF, it looks like we're on page 22, which is odd to me, but that's where we are. And in the book, if you have the hard copy, we're starting at page 39, and I'll just open it up with "On the History of School Desegregation Efforts in Boston," David J. Harris. And David, I'll just read his intro, Sabelo, and then you can take over. And David, everyone, a number of people in our book are actually have actually moved on from these positions. So I'll just continue to read from what was happening at the time. David J. Harris was the managing director of the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice at Harvard Law School. He previously served as founding executive director of the Fair Housing Center of Greater Boston. He has served on many boards, including Mass Humanities as president 2006 to 2008, and is currently the chair of the Massachusetts Advisory Committee and the U.S. Commission to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. Harris provides an overview of the history of school desegregation efforts in Boston and shows how racial inequities were maintained through housing policies. He also warns of the dangers of allowing systemic inequalities to shape narratives around Black communities. Sabelo?
Brown versus Board of Education judged that the education system we had was illegal and unconstitutional, but didn't necessarily require action. Brown too effectively said, we have to dismantle it with all deliberate speed, which we have come to know left an unbelievable amount of flexibility for people to determine what's deliberate and what's speed. All over the country, things proceeded slowly.
Can you keep going for another paragraph?
Sure. But it's also true that in some places, states and jurisdictions did take it seriously, at least on a rhetorical level. In Boston, the Racial Imbalance Act, which passed in 1965, sought to finally make Brown's mandate real and eliminate the racial imbalance that characterized our schools. As people started to organize and mobilize, and then litigate the failure to eliminate the imbalances, it became a catalyst for activism.
Elise Hestack.
All right, I'm reading on the screen. Okay. Morgan versus Hennigan, 1974, was the result of considerable activism, with Ruth Batson and others central to this effort, which traces back to the 1850 court case, Roberts versus the City of Boston. More than 100 years before Morgan versus Hennigan, a Black father tried to enroll his 5-year-old daughter in a school that was closer by and that he thought would give her a better education. Although he lost that case, Massachusetts banned segregated schools in 1955. So even before Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, before Brown versus Board of Education, segregated schools were illegal in the state of Massachusetts. It's an important thing for us to raise because we too often forget just how long and how deep the struggle has been, and that Black people throughout history have sought their rights and recognized the structure of inequality. Can you imagine having a 5-year-old daughter and seeing what is being withheld from her because of her race? Part of the legacy of Morgan versus Hannigan is the mechanisms of hatred that arose in response to school segregation in Boston, one of which was the South Boston Betterment Trust. To me, it was similar to the White Citizens Council of the South. These were holders and protectors of white privilege and white power. Even as the formal battle over integration of the Boston public schools started to die off, the South Boston Betterment Trust endured, and its poisons continue to. I have to wait until the screen switches. Continued to spread to public housing through the development of tenant councils and public housing developments. These organizations were dominated by people from the South Boston Betterment Trust.
Georgette Hestack.
Okay. This received knowledge that if we had desegregated housing first, we might have avoided some of the violence and the vitriol that accompanied desegregating schools. I personally wonder about that, but one thing it would have done is diminish the need to use transportation to achieve the ends of integration. If residential segregation had been dismantled first, busing wouldn't have been necessary. In Boston, residential segregation was maintained by state action. Public housing was segregated along neighborhood lines. Most neighborhoods in Boston had public housing developments, and that development was populated by the dominant racial group of that neighborhood. What happened was that each development had separate waiting lists. So the South Boston development would have a waiting list made up of entirely of white people. Some of the same activities, activists who fought school segregation had to fight the discriminatory practices, public housing, and had to get the courts to aggressively order the creation of a single waiting list. But then, of course, what happened was white flight to the suburbs, and the waiting list for Boston public housing became predominantly people of color.
Jessica,
keep going.
Jessica
Okay.
Hestack. Thank you, Georgette.
One of my most basic points is that segregation itself is not the problem. The problem lies back to the founding of this country and before. A refusal to recognize the humanity and value and worth of Black people and people of color, and the notion that to escape these conditions of disadvantage, you have to be near white people. We need to start from a point of equality and not perpetuate the notion that there's something about Black people or Black culture that is inadequate, problematic, or needs to be fixed. You read it all the time. Black neighborhoods are so disadvantaged that we have to tear them up, dismantle them, put people out, get them out of them. That's a problematic narrative. It's been of the notion of Black community. The emphasis on integration feeds the notion of Black deficit, which rewrites the narrative of Black excellence in such a way that we forget the 1850 Boston school desegregation case. How can we change our understanding or conception of who has value and how we show care for that value in our community? Is there more? I lost my place.
Oh, I'll pick up from here. That was the end of the paragraph, Jessica.
Thank you.
In the narrative we tell about Brown, there's a missing clause. In this country, separate but equal is not possible because of racism. Integration is not a path to racial justice. Rather, it is an outcome of racial justice. It can only occur once we have dismantled the structures of inequality. Instead of opening the door, we need to tear down the door and the walls. This is the difference between an American ideology of individual opportunity and the reality of structures of inequality. Brown exists as an aspirational text in that it joins the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution as formulations of ideals. The importance of Brown is not legal, it is cultural. It is the articulation of this notion of equality that we have to hold on to and try to make real.
Thank you everyone for reading. So now, maybe some of you have carefully underlined your hard copy. I would encourage you to do that in pencil. These books are rare and very limited. Any thoughts, any responses, any questions? We have David J. Harris here with us. What do you think about this chapter? Louise?
This chapter I like was excellent. But one thing about with Louise Day Hicks, they said that she what she did, a Black school wanted to get more money. She was willing to do it, but the superintendent told her if she did it, she wouldn't get elected again. So she turned to the other side. So they didn't even give a chance to approve the Black communities. And about Black areas being high crime, I was gentrified out of the Back Bay, the Fenway area. The landlord tried to, it's after war was going out, if I sold the building and the straw thing, he was getting sued. So it was a straw sale. They went to the same synagogue. They tried to break, it was rent control and price control, break all our leases and everything. We did win at the rent control board, and they let the place go downhill, no heat, no hot water. And then they drove us out, and the Blacks came in for something that was worse. And they charged the Blacks more for worse. And they neglected the area and they let it fall down. It was falling down before the Blacks moved in. And they blamed the Blacks. So like he's saying.
Wow, thank you, Louise. And Louise is reporting from South Boston right now. That's where we delivered her book to her. And
I worked at the high school doing busing.
Yeah, she worked at the high schools during busing. Thank you so much, Louise. A container of history. I saw Sierra's hand up, but did Sierra just go away?
I did. So I really enjoyed this chapter. I think that a lot of different points that David made remind me of the points that Nia and Donna Bivens brought up. In that, there's this understanding that this is not, just desegregation for desegregation's sake, but that there was like a material, I don't want to say like dialectic, but a material basis for people wanting to go to these schools, that it wasn't just about getting into schools for school's sake or for the sake of like being integrated. And there's a question in me that I haven't really like discovered the words for yet, but there's something that there was something that they asked about, whether or not housing integration should have happened first. And that's, I am so interested in that. And I would love if David could like expound on that more, because I have never heard that argument, but also am not really in the education justice space. So I was really piqued by that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's it's a thought that people who do fair housing talk about a lot. You know, people in the education space might not, but you know, I want to come back and say, I think Nia said, you know, what's it like to hear your words, you know, and it's interesting, you know, it is interesting. It's not like Donna. I understand Donna's experience was probably quite different, but and you know, look, I mean, it's always a treat for me to hear my name mentioned with Nia and Donna, and so that's nice. I appreciate that. I want to make 2 points, if I could, very quickly. And one is to clarify, to kind of elaborate a little bit on what I said about Brown versus Board of Education, which is Brown, separate but equal cannot be cannot be equal. Separate cannot be equal in the United States because of racism. And what I mean by that is because in this society, the society will not put the resources into Black schools and Black communities that are necessary. That's the structure. That's the structure of the political economy. And so, as long as that's the case, you know, the schools can't be. Now, in terms of your question about the housing, you know, at one point, you know, in a case, in the parents involved case, which was a big, and let me just stipulate right now, I'm not a lawyer, so I was at the law school and it was around too many, but there was a case, parents involved, and Justice Kennedy asked in the proceedings, Justice Kennedy asked in terms of desegregation, well, to avoid busing, well, what if you built a school on the border between a Black community and a white community so that it could draw equally from both? Now, this is a justice of the Supreme Court who's basically asking a hypothetical question that asks us to simply accept that there are Black and white communities, and that the solution is to build a school, to integrate the school while the communities stay segregated, right? And you know, there's something about even being able to formulate that question that points to how profoundly we are lost, right? Because, and so the argument, you know, and the only point that I make about doing the housing first, as I said, is, you know, part of the real controversy in Boston was around busing, right? And if you know, in theory, if the schools were integrated and you went to your local school, you wouldn't have to be bused, right? You could walk to school. That's the whole point. That's what we all want. You could walk to school. But the other point I would make is that, you know, I really want to emphasize this, and I'm sorry because this addresses your question in a way, because there's another, I think, kind of important point about the nature of the segregation we face, and it's that, you know, we think of integration as a policy, right? And when we think of integration, we think it has to do with proximity. It means you put two things together and you have integration. And typically, so you think, you know, Metco students, you know, are integrated in the suburbs, right? You get on a waiting list for an affordable housing unit someplace, and you're integrating, but your material circumstances remain the same, right? Your income doesn't necessarily go up because you've moved, right? And all the circumstances that led to whatever form of disadvantage you had follow you there. And so to my mind, integration, and people would call that integration, right? And that's why I make that point, that integration is not a policy, it's an outcome. That we have to do all kinds of other things first before we can think about proximity creating justice. Right? So I'm sorry, Tomashi, you know, I just, that's the problem with having an author around. I mean, yes.
This is
But
how
I
this
hope that answered your question.
Because, yeah, that's how this project began on the gloomy day when Cambridge went into lockdown. And we were supposed to have an in-person meeting with David, and we elected not to out of caution. And we ended up on the Zoom with more than 2 hours, and just extraordinary knowledge and generosity and real lived experience with advocacy. The whole thing just opened up like a flower from this sort of time spent. I mean, this really isn't enough time, but I'm just so glad that you're here, and I hope that you'll come back to hear Sabelo and Matt, and to hear Meredith, and maybe we'll get Rashida to come back too. We love you, David. So you can literally go on forever, and there's not enough time.
But I got to interrupt you 1 second, Tomashi, because
yeah.
I have to give back some love here, because that day, you know, you all have to understand, there was a terrible time in all of our lives, right? That beginning, and that experience of that conversation, and Martha and all of you all, was like a refuge. You know, it was like a refuge to be able to have the conversation that we had. What, you know, in its own way, was kind of healing for me, right? You know, because it was an opportunity to be in community across that Zoom, and digging into these questions. So, you know, it was an amazing thing.
Thank you.
And the outcome, and Martha's drawing these drawings are just, everybody knows. I mean, that's just, you know, incredible.
Yeah, and for anyone who maybe wasn't here last week or doesn't have a hard copy of the book already, Martha Schnee, who's here in the room with us, was a graduate student at the School of Education at Harvard, and she was a member of the team, and her job became making drawings of every conversation that we had, taking notes and making drawings. We all did what we were good at, what felt good to do during that time. And that becomes a key component to our archival collection. It also influenced the project that we went on to do in the East End of Long Island, where we got to interview Dr. Georgette Greer-Key, whose hand is up now. Georgette, what are you thinking?
Okay, so I would love for David to really give me more of explaining this last sentence that Nia read. The importance of Brown is not legal, it's cultural. I mean, that seems to sound so profound, and I don't want to assume. So I really want to understand that a little bit more, because I've never heard it be put that way. So that's, I mean, just you really open up my eyes, even talking about integration is an outcome, and there's so many other things. So I was going to try to hold it, but I can't, because now I want to hear your thoughts around that sentence as well.
Yeah, so, you know, and you have to forgive me, you know, because, you know, like Tomashi and Martha, you know, like I say these things, and then, you know, I forget. But what I mean there, so first of all, I mean, first, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't pretend to argue the law of Brown. But I will say that because of what I consider to be its major flaw, which is that it doesn't address the structure of racism, it doesn't name it. You know, in my work, you know, it's really important to name the problem. And if the problem is race and racism and racial disparities, you need to name it. And the court and Brown doesn't really do that. It doesn't really name racism as a structure, right? That it doesn't say that, you know, in this society, it doesn't say what the Kerner Commission 10 years later said, which is, in this society, you know, Black people won't get resources, period. It just doesn't happen. And so, but what's come out of what emerged out of Brown was the civil rights movement, was the idea and the ideal of justice, right? And even though that it was framed as integration, meaning simply proximity and simply a kind of mixture, it holds out this ideal that most people have come to embrace, right? And to recognize even those of very dark hearts and very pale skins, you know, have come to understand and accept in terms of when they think about the strength of the United States, the strength of America, it has to do with the notion of equality. So it's an ideal, and that's what I mean about, you know, in the same way that the Declaration of Independence, the same way that the Constitution has that beautifully scripted, as I always say, you know, beautifully scripted, eloquently scripted phrase, "We the people," you know, which was at its core a lie. It was a lie, and we all winked and nodded and say, "We the people," as if it were real. And in that way, Brown's promise, you know, of an equal society, is like that. You know, it's an ideal, it's an aspiration, it's something that we think of and we can and should be working toward. And that's what I mean by it's become part of our culture, right? And to me, it's the only thing that can give us hope. I mean, because the law isn't doing it, right? So I don't know, Georgia, does that answer your question?
I think it does. And, you know, I just think you dropped us with this last paragraph, and it's like you're making us focus on really dissecting it and reframing everything from, like you said, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. But that aspirational point really sticks out. And then when you said it didn't name it, the law didn't name it. And so that makes me think also, if we didn't name it, there was no real plan in place. What was the framework to move this forward? And so it's like we're working backwards. That's where I am now. But this last paragraph is very strong. It's small and concise, but it is jam-packed. It's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, but we weren't prepared. I mean, and I'm sorry to clarify one thing about the introduction. You see, the thing about the phrase "all deliberate speed" meant slow. All deliberate speed means slowly. That's what it means. So when the legislation said we have to proceed with all deliberate speed, it was a joke, right? It was a cruel joke, right? Because think about it, what does all deliberate speed? It's like a turtle. You know, it's plodding, boom, boom, boom. It's slow. That was the plan.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you everyone for being here. I want to take a moment. Well, I have another question, David.
Sorry, Tomashi. There was a question in the chat from Sabelo.
Oh, awesome. I didn't see that.
Yeah, I know you can't see the question, but Sabelo, would you like to read it yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to be quick in respect of the time. I like the point, David, that you made, that segregation isn't quite the problem, but rather a symptom of racism, for example, and that instead we need to be seen as human or seen differently by the system, or maybe in this case, white folks. And I thought that was really striking. My question was that, is there a possibility that would put us sort of dependent on the white gaze, depending on how other people see us, as opposed to saying how Black people see themselves and how they work together, similar to the movements pushed by Malcolm X, Garvey, Black Wall Street, and other similar movements. Or maybe there's like a little bit of both, changing how we're seen, but also changing how we see ourselves. So just kind of curious on your thoughts on that.
Well, that's a big question in a way. Let me try to. So So I think that's one reason why I had this in our conversation, this piece about people in Black people in Boston demanding access to schools over 150 years ago. Right? That is our history, and that is our reality. That we have always advocated for ourselves. We have always, and that's why I asked the question. I mean, and you know, we can all think about kind of imagine what it's like to have a 5-year-old child, and that child can't go to school right there, and you have to watch that child walk past that school, go somewhere else, and the combination of anger and pride, anger at the situation and pride that one has, and determination that one has that we can in fact do this, it has been buried in our history, but we have to kind of articulate it, bring it forward, and use it as part of defining ourselves and setting our own agenda. You know, there's a you know, I mean, this gets very personal here in a way, because you know, I'm here at the end of my life, at the end of my career and stuff, and can you forgive me? I'm gonna many years ago, my grandfather, who was a Unitarian minister and went to Selma in 1965. He went to Selma. He was like 75 years old. And you know, in 1975 or something, we were sitting around watching the news, and there was a story that came on about cops killing 2 Black men in Baltimore. This is 40 years ago. I mean, you know, it happened just, and my grandfather, who always was very eloquent in the pulpit, but he didn't say a lot around the house, and said to me, he said, David, I wonder if we were wrong. Did I tell you all this story, Tomashi? Did I tell you the story? He didn't say anything else, right? And you know, and he left me to think of it. I think about that about my whole life. And part of me, I thought, oh, he means the path of nonviolence that he chose. I wonder if he's thinking at the end of his life if he had made a mistake. And I resolved it for myself to realize that I don't think he thought it was a mistake, but he was reflecting. He had cause to question, right? And so for all my life, I carried with me this idea that you really have to act in the world so that when you get to be his age, you can look back. And when you think about it, you can say, well, did I do something? You know, and so I've come, but I have to tell you that now, as I'm approaching his age, I ask myself the same question about whether I was wrong. And what I mean was whether I was wrong to take the path of academics and the kind of professional class, and not be out on the street fighting. Seriously, whether or not, because I am so distressed at the lack of progress at where we are, and at having been inside for so long and trying to deal on the inside to no avail. And so, you know, so I think we have to find ways, right, to define ourselves and to demand that people respond to our own self-definitions. And I'll leave you with this, because to me, the conundrum is that we, you know, when I see all these Black Lives Matter signs around in the suburbs, I mean, we need to find ways for those people to understand, to follow us, right? Right. They say that, but they don't, and I don't know how we do that. Maybe you do. I don't. You know, that's the real challenge. So listen, Sabella, I'm sorry, I'm starting to rant, and I don't know if addressed your question, but that's what it provokes in me.
Thank you so much. And I just want to jump in and just remind everyone that there are 2 more sessions. So make sure you have a notebook to write down thoughts that maybe we don't have time to get to, so that we can continue the conversation fluidly as we open up our next 2 and then ultimately our final session. I see Jessica's hand up. I did want to ask David to just take a moment to tell us about these images and these images of Pauli Murray and of Ruth Batson, and then we'll close with Jessica Tan.
Well, so now, well, all I can say is that, when we were reading, I went back and I was reading it today, and I'm looking at these images, and the images are just, this is the spirit that animates us, right? And the example, and because Ruth Batson is like, I've been working with a woman named Tamara Lanier, whose ancestor Papa Rente is depicted in these photographs at Harvard, and I think of Papa Rente as my own ancestor, and I think of Ruth Batson as my grandmother, right? This strong, powerful woman who can laugh, full-bodied, even as she struggles, right? And Pauli Murray, just kind of the kind of picture of courage and wisdom and justice embodied, right? And again, like this is personal stuff, but I was raised by a single mother, right? And so I have, this unbelievably strong attachment to the power of Black women, and this sense that we would be lost without them, and so I don't know, Tomashi. I mean, I don't know what to say. Again, their presence here is so important and so critical for anybody who picks up this book and starts to reflect, on what they gave us and what they left us.
Thank you so much. Jason, I'm looking at you because last time I told you I was going to pick on you, and now we're up against it again. And I am continue to be curious about what you're thinking, but Jess has their hand up. Jess, why don't you take us out?
I'm more than willing to go, but if Jason has something I can give my time, more than willing. I can share my next time.
No, you got that. Go on. I added a little thought in the chat. I'm good. Go on and get your thought out. I'm coming back for the next one.
It might be a bit nonlinear, so I apologize. So feel free to ask me to clarify or go more slowly. But I'm thinking about how both in my limited experience, education and art have like a quality that allows people to process reality and imagination and myth all at the same time. And that the hard part with the law is that it can be very rigid and linear, and it doesn't allow for flexibility at times and growth. And that from a person who has a learning style difference, so for example, for me reading, it was challenging because I had to copy, paste, double space it, make it right justified. So linking this back to the technology piece, I think there's a lot of us learners who don't fit the categories that US schools have been given in right ways, so that when they talk about equality, it's equality to a Western gaze or categorization that's actually detrimental to begin with, or not to begin with, that it's inherently detrimental, and that how do we have experiences of art, of education, of learning, of being, of growth, of joy that allow for joy and allow for organic being that require being seen as human, varied, similar, that require flexibility, and that equality and equity don't get to. And that I think, linking back to the facial recognition piece, like I think it's one of the heartbreaking parts when we think about discipline, right? It puts people's in boxes that are not only like dehumanizing, but just often miss the mark. So I just want to bring the learning style piece in, because I think as a person who discovered late in life, like second grad school program, like that I'm an auditory learner, that I have to read in a certain way, that it also relates to how do you achieve accessible and quality experiences that really do work for multiple learners or all learners, and that it can't be done in a formula, which I think sometimes people equate, as is discussed, Brown versus Bordebed, like as a formula, but it's not, it can't be done in a fixed formula like that. So that's what came up for me.
Thank you so much.
No.
Go ahead. Is that David? Go ahead, David.
No, thank you. I mean, right. I mean, the one thing I would want to say, and maybe close with, from my perspective, is we all know the difference between the law and justice, and we should. And we can define our terms. We define our terms. If they want to talk about the law, I want to talk about justice. And Tomashi and Martha, and for me, I said, I don't think I got in here, but to me, we should think about what justice means, what it looks like, what it feels like. To me, justice means to be made whole. To be made whole. And for me, that's a very, and so when I have conversations, that's animating me. And that gives me confidence in my conversation, because I know what I'm talking about. And I know how what I'm talking about fits that definition of being made whole, right? Now, it doesn't mean that other people understand or respect or whatever, but it's my anchor. And we all find these anchors somehow, and we operate from there. And so anyway, I mean, I just, and so I'm sorry, Jessica. I don't know. There's something, what you said kind of prompted me. We can change the terms. We can define the terms ourselves.
That's very Ujima of you. That's a very Boston Ujima Project thing to say, and this critique of justice, this request of criticality around what justice is. I just want to read aloud what Jason wrote in the chat, because I just got caught up with it.
Let me see.
He said to Sabelo, it's also important not to let those who oppose justice to reduce efforts to increase equity, access, and accountability to label it benevolence. That perspective allows the racial power dynamics and racial hierarchy to remain undisturbed or challenged. This is great, y'all. I can't wait for the next time. I can't wait for the next one. Thank you so much, everyone. I want to take just 1 sec. I'm going to stop the share. You know what time it is. It's picture time. So if you feel comfortable turning your camera on, now would be the time. We're going to take a family picture, a book club picture, and then we will say goodbye. All right, everybody. 1, 2, 3. All right, I got you. I got you.
Bye.
Wait. Hold on a second. Okay, so a reminder, if you do not already have a hard copy and would like one, sign up at the Boston Ujima Project website and we will deliver your copy to your home. Jason, I'm sorry we didn't make deliveries at the end of last month because I had to leave town because I'm in New York, but I'll be coming back. to make all outstanding deliveries and any new ones that are added to the list. Thank you all for spending time together in the Brown 2 Book Club. We took a picture and now we'll say goodbye. I'll see you all next month.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Love you, Catherine.
Love you too.
Catherine.